Good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to Virtual Tolpuddle. We are live on Facebook, Zoom, and going to be recorded on YouTube. My name is Stangham Debonair. I am the Member of Parliament for Bristol West and the Shadow Secretary of State for Housing. And I'm pleased to say we've got a fantastic panel this afternoon. Please keep your questions coming in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you're on Zoom, and introduce yourselves on the chat. I'm going to introduce our speakers now. And as I introduce them, I'm going to ask them if they would introduce themselves back with a few words, minute maybe, on what Black Lives Matter has meant to them, emotionally, personally, professionally, whichever take you want to. So Shavana Taj is Wales's General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress and the first Black or minority ethnic General Secretary. And as she's starting her new role, she has vowed to stand up for workers in Wales under threat from the impact of Brexit, from climate change and automation. I mean, you basically got everything covered there, Shavana, and you got your work cut out. She's come to the Wales TUC from the PCS, Public and Commercial Services Union, and where she was Welsh Secretary, I got this right, since 2013. So, Shavana, can you tell us what Black Lives Matter means to you?
So, what Black Lives Matter means to me is that I think, from a personal perspective, I'm a parent to two young Black children. They are very aware of who they are, partly because of what they see around them, but also what they see in the home. But also because the amount of people that have come out from all different types of backgrounds. In previous demonstrations and everything, we saw, generally we would see trade unions or organized sort of community grassroots action groups. But now the types of people that we're seeing on our streets and the fact that they are demanding change at a time of a public health pandemic, I think that we can take a lot from that.
Thank you, Shavana. It's good to have you with us. And next, Roger Mackenzie, Unison Assistant General Secretary. That's my union. I'm very proud to be a Unison member, as well as, by the way, a Musicians Union member, in case any MU are listening. Roger is one of the UK's leading Black trade unionists and is Assistant Gen Sec for Unison, the largest trade union. His trade union experience, however, started with a one-man strike when working as a painter and decorator, which is something I'd love to be asking you about because that sounds really interesting. And as well as working for PCS and the TUC, he joined Unison 10 years ago. And it says here, which I found really fascinating, and maybe you could bring this in at some point, Roger, that he recently interviewed Bill Lucy, the trade union organizer who ran the Memphis refuse strike that Martin Luther King visited on the day that he was assassinated. And I find that really poignant. He's got no time for words like BAME or BME. He's Black, his politics are Black, and he wants to see the trade union movement step up in the fight against racism. So, with that, Roger, in a few words, what has the emergence of Black Lives Matter meant to you?
Uh, thanks, Stangham. You basically just said it, actually. And by the way, that dispute, I won that dispute as well on my own, right? But I won it because people showed solidarity with me, with my one little cardboard picket line sign outside of a painter and decorating firm. And people responded to that and refused to cross the picket line. So that was wonderful. What does Black Lives Matter mean for me? It means potential for change. It means there's a real potential for turning this really extraordinary moment that we're in into a movement that's going to bring about radical, systemic, and irreversible change. Because I think that's what we need at the moment. We cannot allow this to be just another moment where people get away with just having quick fixes. This is an opportunity for us for real change.
Thank you, Roger. And I'm sure that you, like probably everyone on this panel today, we've sat on enough panels. We've done a lot of discussing. I think quite a few people are feeling like, well, we're a bit paneled out. What we really need is the action. So I'm hoping that this panel can be a way of stimulating and inspiring people to make that change. It's just occurred to me, and Inez, you might be able to help us here. Do we actually have a hashtag for anyone that wants to tweet or do anything on social media? If we do, if you could just pop that in the chat, that'd be awfully helpful. And I'm going to go on now whilst I'm hoping that someone's going to tell me we do have a hashtag because I just about understand what that means. And she has, brilliant. Thank you, Inez. It's hashtag Tolpuddle 2020, of course. Dr. van der Viporska is Executive Director at the Equality Trust, and that's the national charity campaigning to reduce social and economic inequality. She's a visiting research fellow at the University of York, a trustee of the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organisations, of Red Thread Youth, Equally Ours, and governor of a primary school, which is something dear to my heart. She's a regular keynote speaker and sits on or has advised a range of bodies such as the CEVO Race Advisory Panel, NUS Poverty Commission, Sex Education Forum Advisory, loads of them. So, Wanda, you've got loads that you're bringing to the discussion this afternoon, just like everybody here. Can you tell us what the emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement has meant for you?
Yeah, and I think most importantly, given that we're here at Tolpuddle, I've also spent over a decade working in trade unions and have been a trade unionist since about the age of 20. For me, it's personal, again, as a mother, to hear somebody in their dying breath call for their mother, I think touches all of us and all of our hearts. But in the wider voluntary sector, which is, you know, the trade unions are a part of the wider voluntary sector, and the charity sector in particular, and also seeing in the business sector that people are really trying to go a little bit beyond that performative black tile or the setting up of EDI groups and really coming out and saying, we do want to change this. And I think the key part of this change and this systemic change that Roger mentioned is that we have to use this to boost the struggle that we've all been in and that our, you know, generations before us have been in. But it's really going beyond the Black and Asian communities. It's going into white communities where there are white people suddenly saying, actually, we can't stand by and watch this happen. So I think that allyship is really important. And to see a genuine intention for change. I've spoken to people over the last couple of weeks that have ranged from investors to FTSE 100 companies to just, you know, friends that I know from school. So, you know, there really is a moment here to absolutely turbocharge what we've all been doing for so long.
I think you encapsulated that beautifully there, Wanda, and I'm looking forward to picking up on a few of those themes that people have already brought up, all of you. And I'm now going to turn to Marvin. Marvin is my mayor, so I'm very happy to welcome him. He is currently in the mid under some trees, and actually I can't see him on the screen at the moment, so I'm hoping he's still there. Marvin was elected to be mayor of Bristol in May 2016. He's a Yale World Fellow, graduate of Operation Black Vote. He's worked and studied in the UK and the US, former BBC journalist, public health worker, voluntary sector manager, co-founder of City Leadership Programme, and as my mayor, he has developed the One City Plan for Bristol. And he's also been at the centre of various media storms over the last few weeks because it was in Bristol and actually in my constituency, Bristol West, that Colston statue was pulled down. And then last week, another one put up and then taken down again. So there's been a bit of statue going on. And I wonder, Marvin, could you tell us personally, professionally, what has this movement meant for you over the last few weeks?
So it's a time of incredible opportunity. I read a quote recently that was saying it's in times of great turmoil that the impossible becomes possible. And, you know, you align up Black Lives Matter with COVID, with the economic turmoil and the turmoil we were in anyway that maybe, you know, that sat silently behind our events. There's great opportunity. But if I can open the door to great threat too, and the threat is that we don't take this opportunity, just like we failed to take previous opportunities: civil rights movement, anti-globalization protests, financial crisis, civil rights movement, Cold War, and you know, there's been areas of great promise that we've not managed to harvest. It's a time that absolutely requires us to be very clear on what we mean by racism. Even yesterday, I had a conversation with quite an activist who basically wanted us to sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya. And I was trying to say, this has to be about power. All right, this is about economics and politics. It's not about just being nice to each other and being educated about each other's cultures. So we've got to be on top of our understanding.
Thank you, Marvin. And thanks for bringing power into the discussion, which I think is something we're going to bring back. I know there's been a couple of people saying in the chat they prefer the gallery view. I'm not sure. I think we'll probably go back to that once we've done the introductions. I'm next going to introduce Patrick. I'm just checking that I have got everyone, because I've actually next in has got Wilf, and I don't see Wilf. No, so I'm going to move on to Patrick. Patrick Roach, Dr. Patrick Roach, he's General Secretary of the NASUWT, Teachers Union, my mother's union, so I feel very attached to it. It's the largest union in the UK that exclusively represents teachers and head teachers and principals. He was appointed GenSec in April 2020. What a time to take on a new brief. Having previously served as Deputy GenSec for the previous 10 years, formerly a teacher of politics and sociology in further education, and a researcher and lecturer in education, social policy and equalities in higher education. And Ines is saying we will go back to gallery shortly. So finally, Patrick, in a few words, before we go on to a wider discussion, what has the emergence of Black Lives Matter meant to you?
Well, thanks very much, Dame, and good afternoon to you and to everyone that's gathered for this event at Tolpuddle. I mean, you know, no one could not have been moved by, you know, frankly, the shocking images that we saw being played out on our screens of the murder of George Floyd. But that was a moment, a real catalyst for change. And as other colleagues on this panel have said, you know, that moment has sparked a movement and a renewal of a movement, because I think we've all been part of a movement for racial justice now for many years, but it's required a further catalyst or spur for action. One of the things that's really impressed me about this moment is how that has created an opportunity, really, for a broad-based coalition for change for racial justice. And I think that there is a recognition about the moral obligation to paraphrase the words of John Lewis, who sadly passed away today. That moral obligation to speak out and to take action in the face of, you know, unfairness and injustice in our world. And if we can begin to harness that moral obligation and see that as part and parcel of our obligation as trade unionists, as civil rights activists, then we can really make the change that's going to make the real difference to the lives of not only Black people in this country, but to all people in this country and around the world.
Thank you, Patrick. And as you can see, those of you watching, there's just a huge amount of campaigning and life and work experience on this panel. And I'm going to ask them all, if possible, to try and speak in their own voice on behalf of themselves. But if you do feel you're also speaking on behalf of your organisation, please feel free to bring that in as well. Many of us, as I said, have been on panels before. And I suppose lots of people, perhaps everyone who's spoken so far, has said, you know, what's going to be the difference has got to be the action. How can we turn that campaigning energy, particularly bringing in young people, and Wanda mentioning, you know, white people who've said, we up with this, we will not put, who want to be involved, and people in the chat are saying the same thing. How can that be turned? How can we harness that energy and turn it into concrete action? Because a lot of us, I'm going to include myself here, I've been around the block a few times. I can remember demonstrations in the 70s and 80s. And I think, so what's different about now? How are we going to take Marvin's warning words about not losing the opportunity and turn it into real concrete action? And what do you think that concrete action needs to look like? Who'd like to kick us off? Haha. Otherwise, I'm going to volunteer you. Okay, Wanda.
Yeah. I'm not going to answer the question directly, which is a new thing,
right.
Politician. But what I would say is that question brings out one of the key issues, which is how we engage with other generations. Because I hope nobody on the panel minds us saying we are all of a certain age on this panel, aren't we? It's a good age, it's an experienced age, but nevertheless, what I'm seeing, and especially in the charity sector, is this dissonance between younger activists who are, you know, going through a lot of these things for the first time, but who are also a lot more aware and who are working through social media and other channels as well. And those of us who have, as you've said, been around the block, seen some of these things, fought some of these battles already. And I think what we really need to do is have that coming together, because we can learn from each other. We can learn from what they're doing. They can learn from our experience. And I think one thing that's different now is that we did all see those pictures of George Floyd, unfortunately. you know, and we've seen them happening just down the road from me in Islington in this country a couple of days ago. And we are seeing this, and the more people see, the less they can deny it and the less they can claim ignorance. So I think those are key issues that will fuel the actions that we're taking, but it also keeps the issue alive. And this is a key thing. If we come back a year from now to Tolpuddle next year, what change will we have seen and what part will we have played in that change?
So I think, Patrick, you just waved your hand at me, and forgive me if any other panelists do feel free just to lift your hand if you're ready to come in. Patrick, where do you want us to be in a year's time when we come back to Tolpuddle?
Well, I'd certainly like to think that we would be able to come back saying what progress we have made, but we've got to be clear about what progress we're seeking to make. And we shouldn't assume that, you know, one less violent death of a black man on our streets constitutes progress. What we need to be very clear about is what injustice means and what it looks like, how it manifests itself, and what we want to change. But how can we bring about that change? Well, you know, I'm representing a trade union, and one of the critical mechanisms that is available to me is what our members do, what our activists do in workplaces. And of course, you know, schools are set to reopen fully again in September, we hope. Let's hope that will be the case. Well, those are places for organising, and we need to think about how we engage with our members of all ages, male, female, black and white, in that campaign for racial justice. But as educators as well, I think we've got a role and a responsibility. I spoke earlier about moral obligation. I think there is a moral obligation to connect with children and young people. I mean, children's lives have been impacted seriously as a result of, you know, coronavirus lockdown. For many children, their mental health has been scarred as a result of this pandemic. But one of the things that children have also witnessed, as we have testified here, is they've witnessed being played out on their screens, you know, a racist murder of a black man on the streets. And that will have impacted on the lives of many young people returning to school. So we have a moral obligation as well, as teachers, as educators, to connect with young people in our classrooms, as well as organising within our staff rooms for racial justice. And that has got to be a key opportunity, I think, for us as trade unionists to really make a difference here.
Thank you, Patrick. And I think bringing in trade unionism is important, because this is why we're here. I'm going to go to Marvin next, even though Shavannah and Roger both got their hands up. I'm worried that Marvin, out of doors, is using up his phone battery and we might lose him. So Marvin, there's a few thoughts there. I mean, about bringing in young people. What would progress look like for you by the time we get to a year from now in Bristol, do you think?
So I just pick up on something Patrick just shared there that's really important. I think we've got to know what we're trying to get done. So I'll tell you, just yesterday I had a conversation with someone who shared with me they were one of the people involved in pulling the statue down and a new statue going up. And I said to him, well, what is the specific policy outcome you're trying to attach it to? Well, he had none. I said, well, there's a whole range of drivers of structural inequality, race and class. It's inequalities in housing, in education, mental health, criminal justice system, employment, poverty, child hunger. You know, I didn't want to rag on him, but, you know, and I reminded them that when King was on the Selma March, they had a specific idea of what they wanted to achieve. And it was a Voting Rights Act. Before that, it was a Civil Rights Act. Before that, it was obviously desegregation of the schools or desegregation of the bus network. And it just strikes me, we just really need to be clear. This is not just about throwing out a generic, we are going to love each other and, you know, we believe Black Lives Matter. It has to look like real policy. I actually think that one of the key areas that I'd like us to be able to get our heads around is housing. I said one of the biggest expressions of race inequality in the last 5 years has been Grenfell. Yeah. And housing, whether it be ghettos, whether it be no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, albeit gentrification today, are one of the biggest expressions of race inequality. That doesn't always look dramatic because it takes time to build houses and affordable homes. So we have to be also minded that not every action on tackling racism looks dramatic and looks flamboyant. Some of these are just the nuts and bolts of tackling an unjust economic system.
So you're speaking my language there, because housing's my brief, and many of you will have perhaps read the Resolution Foundation's report that came out a couple of weeks ago about housing during COVID, and the huge disparity between the experiences of white people and large numbers of Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic people was really, it wasn't surprising, but it was shocking. And the inequality of the quality of housing and of the cost. I'm going to bring Shavana in next and then Roger, but also Marvin, while you're keeping an eye on your phone battery, I'm going to want to come back to you fairly soon on following up some of the questions coming in the chat. One of which is about whether racial inequality is a fundamental feature of capitalism. And if you had the power to do it, what action would you take? And I think you've started on that one with housing, but I'm going to ask all the panel a bit about that. Shavana, do you want to pick this up for us next?
Yeah, so being based in Wales, I guess we're lucky that we actually do have a Welsh Labour government that does engage with trade unions and works in social partnership. And because of the fact that, you know, we do have that, we have been able to introduce some changes. One of them being that Black history will be taught within education in Wales, so that's already been agreed. There's a series of other recommendations that a group of Black workers and specialists who got together have made in relation to the socioeconomic disproportionate impact of COVID-19. We know that we've got longer term work to be done as far as equality overall in the public and the private sector is concerned, as far as justice and housing and so forth and education. But as far as the workplace is concerned, we do really need to start tackling the real systemic inequalities and discrimination that exists, because and I talk in a TUC voice now, and that is that our recent polling that we did, and some of our data came out yesterday, just reaffirmed what we already knew was the case before COVID even happened. So the data tells us that 1 in 5 Black people have said that they'd been treated unfairly at work because of their ethnicity, and this was specifically during COVID-19, that around 1 in 6 Black workers had said that they felt more exposed and being asked to do much more difficult jobs, and that they were being overly exposed to COVID-19, that they were not being provided with the appropriate PPE and so forth. And, you know, this was not just in health and social care, although that is where we heard some of the real horrendous stories. You know, this existed across the transport sector, in education and so forth as well. So if anything, it's just it's reproven what we already knew. I think that I agree with what some of the previous panelists have said, that we need to be clear in terms of what our asks are. But I am also very conscious of the fact that we need to be organizing better, and we need to be taking into account the fact that there are a number of young people who are leading these demonstrations on our streets and so forth. And we in Wales here, we have been trying to work much more closely with people, whilst respecting that, you know, there are going to be intergenerational differences, but at the same time, there can be some real intergenerational solidarity as well. And I think that we do need to start looking at the workplace, looking at employment rights. We need to get rid of 0-hour contracts. All of these systems and all of these types of inequalities are partly the reason why so many Black people at the moment have been at risk and are dying on the job.
Thanks, Shavana. So we've got housing needs sorting out, we've got employment needs sorting out, we've got things in schools and education. Roger, what do you want to add to that? What actions would you like to see us having taken in the next year that would mean real and sustained change?
Of course, one of the most kind of obvious things that needs to be dealt with within the next few months is the grotesque way that Black people have been put in harm's way during this pandemic. And the government really has to be held to account for what it's done over that. So in terms of something immediate, that's what I think needs to be looked at. So, I mean, we've all seen reports forever, you know, I mean, I've seen too many, read too many, been to too many conferences about them, and the books about the conference and all sorts, you know, I mean, this just goes on and on and on. And actually what we don't see is sustainable change. And the point that I made in my introduction points, I want to come back to a minute, is that we can't allow organisations to do what they always do, which is to try and get away with quick fixes. So this moment that we're in and all the talk about turning it into a movement is really important. But why we have to keep some momentum going behind this is because organisations traditionally do turn to trying to do a quick fix solution, just to try and stop people from demonstrating, to try and stop a whole movement from springing up. And I think that's a task that we've got. I think what's really, really interesting about this moment is that a load of young people, black and white, which I think is really, really interesting and really important. They're not waiting for the kind of traditional institutions to do this stuff for them. They're just going out on the streets and organising. Even though a lot of these demonstrations, uprisings in some way, are called Black Lives Matters, and actually, that many of them aren't linked to an organisation called Black Lives Matter. People are just deciding that we are going to assert that Black Lives Matter, and they are going out and organising. Now, I'm an organiser, and I think it's really, I'm trying to tell people all the time that we all have the ability to be able to go out and organise. And what we're seeing with these in this moment is people actually doing it. Final point I'd like to make if I could, Thangham, because I think a thread through this discussion so far, I think, is absolutely vital, and it's this: is that we can't have this as Marvin was saying earlier on as some kind of kumbaya moment. I have never, ever been somebody who believes in equality or freedom is on that mountain so far away that we can barely see it. I've never been that kind of person. I think we can count it. I think we can count equality. I think we can count freedom. And I think the points that are being made about housing and education are really vital in us being able to do uprisings against colonialism, as important as that is, the uprisings against slavery. But my history, the history of my people, started way before that, right? Way before. And I think those are the things that need to be on the curriculum as well.
Now, I'm glad you brought that up, Roger. I'm going to come back to everyone about education if I can before the end of our time together, because I've been talking to the schools on my patch about, it shouldn't just be about, are you doing anti-racism work? It should be, are you teaching about the history of mathematics, which began in Babylon and India several long thousand years before the Greeks caught on? How are you teaching different subjects? So I wanted to pick up with Marvin, who is the mayor of a whole city, and therefore has to try and bring a whole mixed population of 500,000 people with him. And is accountable to all of those 500,000 people. How do we bring the whole population with us? And I'm thinking partly because some of you have already mentioned the fact that young people, both white and black, have got involved, that people who haven't necessarily been active in political protest have got involved. And we want to harness that in some way. How do you think, Marvin, that we can capture bring a whole city with us?
Well, we've been trying to do that in many ways. There's a danger, isn't there, that people live in their bubble and they think everyone looks like them. Everyone thinks like them. Okay. So within the social media bubble, everyone was elated that Colston got pulled down. And honestly, one of the most popular phrases I get on social media is the people of Bristol, on behalf of the people of Bristol. People who are not self-appointed, well, they are self-appointed, telling me that what they are saying to me is what the people of Bristol want. It goes on all the time. And actually, Bristol's a very complicated city. There are people who are elated that Colston was pulled down. There are some people who actually are sympathetic that he came down, but are dismayed by the way it happened. And there are people that feel that Colston is somehow Bristol, and that by being pulled down, they've lost a piece of themselves. What we have to do is be able to build relationships with all those people, because not everyone who was concerned about Colston coming down is a racist. I actually went out to meet some of the football lads who organised the rally at the Cenotaph the weekend after, right? And they were at pains to point out that they were not far right, the ones I was meeting. And in fact, one of them was mixed race, and he's not far right, but they had concerns about, and there's all sorts of sub-conflict going on here, right? Some were far right, but not everyone was far right. And if we just label all working class white people that are concerned about what happened as far right, we'll end up in a really bad situation. The way I've tried to do it is this, and it's the reason why we took the statue down the other day. We're saying there's going to be a process, right? The process is going to be looking at Bristol's history in all its fullness about black people, working class, trade unions, women, gay people, migrants, children. We're gonna tell the full story of Bristol, and through that journey, hopefully we'll be in a better position to assess the people that have been held up as heroes and new people we might want to be our heroes. And then as a city, with that fuller information, we'll make an assessment of what goes up. Now, what we don't want to do is circumvent that process. So it looks like one person has decided, even if they do claim to be the voice of Bristol. And it's the process that makes sure that even if you don't get what you want, and even if you get what you don't want, you know you've been respected by the city. But we do need to hold together people who are fearful at the moment as well, because they may not be overtly fascist or racist like some people are just dismissing them. They might just be scared because the world around them is changing and they don't know what to do, and they're kicking out. And we need to build solidarity.
I think we've lost Marvin to his battery. Oh, Marvin, are you still there? Well, we'd come to a good point, and I'm glad that I apologise to all other panelists, but that's why I wanted to catch Marvin before his battery died. I know how it is when you're out of doors. I wondered if we could turn to education now, because some of you've already alluded to it, and people emailed me in their thousands. I got to tell you, I've been emailed in the space of about 48 hours around the time the Colston statue came down in my constituency. It was 4-figure sums of people who were emailing me, but actually most of them wanted to talk about education. So what does that mean? What do you think that looks like? Marvin talked there about involving the whole city and telling the story of the whole city. So it's not just about schools, but it does include schools. It maybe starts with schools, maybe it doesn't. What do you think? I'm going to go first to Patrick as a representative of a teachers' union.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you quite rightly say there, Fang. It's not just about schools. It is schools are part of the jigsaw in terms of education, but actually we should be talking about more than just schools. I mean, at the end of the day, we've had since 2010 a massive assault, quite honestly, on public education in this country, not just in terms of school cuts, but also in terms of cuts to libraries, to galleries, to youth and community provision, all of which were about, frankly, the development and nurturing of the next generation, the space in which you can explore your identity, your sense of belonging, your history, and indeed the contribution that you can make and develop your potential. And so much of that has gone. We've also seen since 2010, of course, an assault on education within our schools. We've actually seen the removal of, frankly, an entitlement to a national curriculum. Now, we may all have different viewpoints on what should be in a national curriculum, what shouldn't be in a national curriculum. But the very idea of an entitlement in respect of what children and young people should be learning seemingly has been removed, and that is profoundly unhelpful as a government has pressed ahead with an agenda of privatisation of our education landscape, the academisation process, and so on. When we then get onto what is taught, of course, then within schools, whether that's around the teaching of history, but actually it's about much more than the teaching of history. We need to be looking at how we decolonise the entirety of the curriculum, actually. Colleagues on this panel have already referred to, the teaching of mathematics, the teaching of science, the teaching of music and the arts. All of these are areas that are, frankly, ripe for the unpacking, for beginning to understand the contributions that have been made from communities right around the world from a non-colonial perspective. So there is work to be done there, and of course that work's got to be supported by teachers and staff working in schools who are trained and who are ready for that task, for that activity. And it's vitally important, again, that government is investing in the profession to deliver those entitlements for children and young people. Regrettably, however, we've had a government that has been much more committed to removing those entitlements, and in removing those entitlements for asserting a particular form of education, which is not only narrow, but which is also exclusive.
Thank you. And I'm going to come to Wanda next because I really want to hear from you about how you think we can embed embed a concept of a really good reflective national curriculum across all aspects of the curriculum. And we've also got in the Q&A a very long contribution, very thoughtful, from Ekwa Bayonu about embedding information and undoing disinformation. And you've talked a lot up there about sort of deconstructing white imperialism and slavery, and just there's so much there. I would love to unpack all of that. But Wanda, I wonder if you could take the next step in helping us to understand what we mean here.
Yeah, I think having had the pleasure of working in an education union for 4 years, one of the things I would say is to take that further step back. I absolutely agree with everything Patrick's saying, but in all honesty, we do have to take into consideration the makeup of the workforce in education and the fact that it is so predominantly white. And this is an issue. You know, we have to look at why people aren't going into education, and I think we all know some of the reasons why people don't become teachers or go back into education. So one thing is the workforce, as well as the academisation and fragmentation of the education system. But I think there's a wider issue here as well, which is about what we're teaching in schools and whether we're teaching that critical thinking, and in particular a sort of political education, an education about what the system is, who it's there, you know, to serve. And so that's why, and now I speak as director of the Equality Trust, we are developing educational resources to unpack inequality, to look at inequality, and we've been working with some young people across London to explain, in a sense, and to stimulate their thoughts about why are they in the housing that they're in? Why are their parents in the jobs that they're in if they're working? You know, can they spot these patterns and these trends, and they realize and use their own lived experience to see the reality of what we all know about the inherent inequality and discrimination in the system. And so I think we need much more of that, because, you know, these are the activists of the future, and we need to make sure that we are empowering them at this point to understand the system, so that then they know how to challenge it.
Thank you. I'm going to take us on a little bit with one of the questions that's come up in the chat, which I think, as socialists and we're at a trade union conference, I think is good at least to have a look at it. And that is, is racial inequality just a fundamental feature of capitalism? Is there a way of undoing discrimination without undoing capitalism? And I just wondered if we could start by perhaps with Shavana. As a TUC General Secretary, do we need to redo the whole of capitalism, scrap it completely, or can we find a way of accommodating it?
I think that we've spent a number of years trying to change it from within. I think that, if anything, COVID-19 has just proven that capitalism really does work for the interests of the 1% or the 5%, depending on which figure you run by. We know that, you know, frontline workers, key workers, they are the lowest paid, and they are the ones that have been holding up the economy. They are the ones that have been going out to work. They are the ones, many of them, who actually are agency workers and are therefore, you know, being exploited in so many different ways. Already were exploited before COVID happened, and have now faced it even more so. You know, all we have to do is, let's look at the examples of what happened in Leicester a couple of weeks back, as far as the factories were concerned, and where there was an outbreak, and predominantly a large proportion of Asian workers, many of them who were definitely paid well below the minimum wage. The fact of the matter is that if government, you know, doesn't put the resources in to actually have inspectors that go in to see what exactly is going on and what's on the books and what's happening in reality, those people are going to continue being exploited. I mean, at the moment, just based on HMRC's own sort of reporting figures, you're likely to get a visit by an inspector 1 in 500 years or something. The figures are absolutely insane. So exploitation, you can get away with it so easily in the current system. So if we are going to do better, then I think that we do have to find another way. We do need to have a better society than the one that we do. And I think that's what I want to see after, I think we need to start working on it now. Yes, the UK government did something in terms of they introduced some a form of furlough. But again, there was no guarantee of the other 20% coming from the employer. So there wasn't something for something. Now, of course, a lot of these schemes are going to be going. More people are facing redundancy. People are going to be, unfairly discriminated against more so. Particularly, we know the women are going to be impacted because, there is no childcare for many people at the moment. So if we don't actually deal with, if we really want to deal with equality, and we do want to be more equitable and fairer as a society, then I think, yeah, we do need to have a new system altogether.
Okay, Roger, we've got that question about, do we need to abolish capitalism before we can get rid of racism? But I've also got here in the Q&A, we've had some discussion about educating children at schools and colleges. What about educating older people? And perhaps I'd push you into sort of your role. How does that work in the trade union movement as bringers of political education?
Okay, I'm pretty sure I just heard Shivana come out for socialism for the Wales TUC, which is fantastic. I'm with you, and I genuinely am, actually, because I've seen no evidence whatsoever that the current system that we live under or is done to us, actually, is ever going to tackle the deep-seated racism that we experience at the moment. So for me, I'm a socialist, unapologetic. I am a socialist, and I believe that we need fundamental and radical change in this society in favour of working class people. I think when you start looking at the whole issue of racial capitalism, essentially, I think we really have to not apologise about talking about class and the importance of class in that discussion. And far too many people kind of shy away. It's like some kind of bogey word or something that is just too difficult to get into. Actually, as part of this debate, it is so critical at the moment, because far too often Black people are portrayed as not being part of any kind of real working class. We're something else, and the working class is actually white people. And I just think that's an appalling way of setting things out. We are part of the working class, and linking back to the issue of education, and I'll get onto the adult education bit as well in a minute. But for me, as I said earlier on, I want us to think more broadly about the things that we are taught in our schools, but I really also think there's an opportunity to think more widely about what's taught in adult education and in further and higher education, what's left of those things, because actually what's left of those things is very little. They have, as Patrick said earlier on, been thoroughly decimated as part of the assault on public education. But we, as part of that assertion of Black people as being part of the working class, I want to be talking about what the contribution that Black people have made to building of the working class in this country. The great book on this issue, actually, recommendation for everybody, is The Making of the Black Working Class in Britain by Ron Ramadin. And he does an extraordinary, brilliant expose of all of the contributions, or a lot of the contributions that have been made by Black people within the trade union movement, within the Chartist movement, and within a whole range of different issues. But for me, one of the issue that never really gets talked about is things like the Newer Monitoring Project, the Southall Monitoring, all of these bodies, Newer Monitoring, all of these bodies that were set up as a way of not just monitoring racism, but actually to build a resistance to racism. And I think those are things that need to be taught. It's not just about a Black person was involved in inventing whatever, that's important, but also we made this contribution not just on our own, but collectively as well. And we are talking, this is a movement about the collective, and we shouldn't forget that people have resisted racism, have resisted the worst forms of capitalism, not just on their own, although there was some of that, but collectively as well.
Thank you. I am so pleased that this is being recorded because I've been trying to keep notes, and I'm going to have to go back and record and watch the recording because this has been a really rich discussion. We've got about 10 minutes or so first before we end. So if anybody has got anything else they want to pop in the Q&A box, I think we've touched on everything that's been put in there so far. Patrick, I wondered how well you feel your profession is supported, equipped, resourced to take on some of that challenge, and also how we go further, and as Akua said in the chat, how we educate ourselves and support others to self-educate.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that. I mean, how well supported is the teaching profession? Well, if we look at what the government has been doing for the last decade and more, not entirely as supported as the profession should be. We know that, as it were, there's been a massive crisis in relation to teacher recruitment and retention. The government may feel it's turned a corner on that because as jobs are being hollowed out elsewhere in the economy, more and more graduates are being driven into teaching. So that may get government over a particular hump at the moment, but in terms of teacher retention, the morale of teachers, it is pretty low. And we've seen teachers in the midst of this crisis doing everything they possibly can to support children and young people, often despite any action from government, despite support from government, and in the absence of the resources that teachers need to support children, and particularly children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. I mean, we've been hearing the debates, haven't we, in recent weeks about the government's promise of laptops to the poorest children, and frankly, I still am left scratching my head. Where are those laptops? Because I'm being told there are hundreds of thousands of them, but no one seems to be able to find them. So are teachers being supported? Well, sure, teachers are trying to do their utmost to support children and young people, but government has to step up here and give teachers and give children and young people the support that they need in the midst of this crisis. Can I just come back though to something that was we've just been talking about? I mean, in the context of capitalism, I'm not going to disagree with anything that colleagues have said in relation to that. But it is also important that we recall what we were saying earlier in this discussion about what progress actually looks like. Because my worry is that in 12 months' time, when we come back to review, well, what did change 12 months on from, as it were, COVID-19? We may be finding ourselves in the midst of one of the deepest economic crises that the country has known, and profoundly deep for Black communities. And I think we've got a moment in which we need to be calling that issue out and challenging government about how it's going to ensure that we are not going to be repeating the mistakes of the past. I kind of cut my teeth in political activism, if you will, as a result of Margaret Thatcher's assault on working class people. And it wasn't just an assault on the working classes per se. It was also a racialized, a racist assault on Black communities as well. And with Black workers 3 times more likely to be unemployed then. In 2008, with the global financial crisis, we've seen that massive disparity in terms of what's happened to Black communities. And again, now in 2020, we're going to be finding, as Shavana was saying earlier, that actually one of the impacts of this crisis could be that Black workers are losing out to employment. They're more likely to find themselves in precarious employment, 0 hours contracts, and so on. Those are the issues that we're going to have to attend to. Those are the issues that we need, in Roger's words, to draw up the metrics and to measure progress against, because otherwise I suspect that we're going to be seeing a rolling backwards.
So I think there's one really measurable thing that I'm going to ask you all about, and Wanda, I'm going to bring you in next. I know you've got something you want to follow up on there, but I'm going to add another question, which I'd like us to have attended to in the next 8 minutes if we can. It's come up in the chat, but it's consequent from some of the things you've all been saying. We're all trade unionists. How do we these are a measurable thing we can be held responsible for and accountable for. How are we going to increase trade union membership from those Black Lives Matter activists, from young Black people, from people in the precariat, in those rubbish jobs? How are we going to change the way trade unions work? How do we need to change what a trade union is and how people get in touch with trade unions? Wanda, I know you wanted to pick up on something else, but if you could then segue neatly into that, I'd be grateful, because I want to hear from all of you before the end on that, as this is a trade union event.
Okay, very quickly. There is something we can do in the next 12 months, and that's campaigning for the socio-economic duty, Section 1 of the Equality Act, which would lay the obligation on public bodies to take into account the effect of their policies and actions on socio and economically disadvantaged people and on inequality. That's one thing we can do. And we need an inequality reduction strategy from the government. We need the government to recognise, as it signed up to the UN SDGs, one of which is to reduce inequality, that this actually is an issue. I'm not holding my breath over the next year, though. Attracting people into trade unions. This starts at school. I've been into schools and talked to people about trade unions, and they've said, wow, I never knew about that. Why wouldn't you join a union? So we all have that obligation, word of mouth, telling people we know, organising, but also organising in a different way, because the workplace has changed. We're not organising in factories with huge numbers of people there. We are organising in the gig economy, and that's really, really tough. And I was speaking to a FTSE 100 company a couple of months ago, saying that actually they didn't need big offices anymore, and that they were looking at people selling in their skills. Now, if that's happening at that high level, if they're adapting the gig economy, then we're really going to see a huge shift in the coming years. And trade unions need to be able to adapt to be where people are, not expecting people to come on a Wednesday evening at 6:30 to a meeting and join a committee. I think, you know, we've all been there. We all know what that's like. We need to be far more adaptive to the circumstances. And I understand how difficult that is. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of feet on the ground. But if we don't change, we will not be able to protect all of those people who don't have a clue that employment law even exists.
Thank you. Patrick, how can we get more young Black people, more activists, more young people into unions, or adapt the trade union movement, or both? Something that we can be measured against this time next year.
Well, I think there's lots of things that we could be thinking about. I mean, clearly the landscape and the environment has got to be conducive to Black workers, young and old, being in unions. They'll also need to be in the workplace as well. So let's not lose sight of that. But we need leadership, and we need strong leadership. We need leaders who are prepared to and will speak out on race. We need more Black leaders of our trade unions. I mean, it's as simple as that, without that, if we have a union movement that doesn't speak like me, doesn't look like me, doesn't speak for me, then why would I want to be a part of that? I think the trade union movement has done a huge amount in respect of anti-racist activism, but there have been some moments in our history as unions that we perhaps shouldn't be entirely proud about. This should be a moment for reflection for us as a movement, and this should be a moment in which we seek to change who we are, what we are, how we represent our members, and how we represent on the issues of racial equality and racial justice. We've got to make that a top priority in our agenda, within our individual unions and across the movement.
So a couple of good comments that come in the chat before I move on to Roger. My own original union, I was a musician first and foremost, and I lived in the gig economy. That was how most musicians made our livings. So Musicians Union, Writers Guild, Wanda's reminded us, have got a great track record, you know, going back decades of representing people literally in the gig economy, because they are literally gigging. And also Darren McLaughlin's raised various other trade unions and organisations who are doing good work with organising in the precariat. Roger, I'm going to come to Shavana last. So Roger, could you give us your thought, please, on how we're going to measure our activism as trade unionists in the next 12 months in relation to Black Lives Matter?
I think it's really difficult to see this as a sprint.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be cautious about that, because I think we have to engage in this for the long term, because I think one of the problems has been, and actually there's been a recognition of this by the TUC. Actually, I mean, Patrick and myself are on the General Council of the TUC, and the fact that we've had to go back and set up the TUC Stephen Lawrence Task Force again, which thankfully, and I told you this would happen, that Patrick is going to be chairing that task force. So I think that's a wonderful, wonderful move. But the fact that we've had to go back and do that tells me that we really have to connect with this for the longer term. I'll just make this point before I finish, so that Shivana's got some time as well. There was a question on earlier on the chat, on the Q&A, about what would be the one thing that I would do and that we should do. And I want to answer that really clearly. I think we have to work to get rid of Boris Johnson, because without getting rid of him, we're not going to actually see any real fundamental change. It is a disgrace that this country has a prime minister who's frankly a racist, and I think that's a real problem for us.
I think the way he's going on, he might be got rid of by his own side, and then that might be a problem for those of us that want to replace the Tory government by a Labour government. But I'm completely with you, Roger. It's an absolute disgrace. I'm going to ask Shivana to have the last word on, as we ended up with trade union, the trade union movement, and to have you as a black woman trade union TUC General Secretary in Wales is great for us. How do you think we need to be doing this over the next 12 months?
Well, I think, like many of my colleagues have said, this is we can't treat it as a sprint, but nonetheless, I think that the union movement just needs to be prepared to get uncomfortable, and sometimes you need to hold up a mirror and have that conversation. And there are a lot of people within our movement who think it is just simply about being anti-racist, but they don't actually accept that they might be a part of the problem themselves. So I think that moment needs to take place. In terms of what we can do, look, a part of one of the things that I've been doing as the TUC General Secretary is making sure that we are reaching out to third sector organizations, BME, black organizations, working with young people, giving them the opportunity to engage and to take leadership and to take up space. And to be the voice for the sectors that they work in, or a sector that they would like to work in as well, so that when we are engaging with politicians and other people where decisions are being made, that it's not me only talking about these issues, but that they're there as well. And I also have made sure that I make myself available. So if somebody wants to has got a problem, I always say to them, you don't have to, I will speak to anyone. If you've got an issue or you need some help, then the union movement is here. There's a helpline that's currently being set up, but for black communities in Wales. The Wales TUC is going to be involved in that. We are going to be assisting people if they have a problem at work, and also forwarding those queries on to unions, and encouraging people to join unions in that way as well. We set up a whistleblowing site really early on, so again, people could share information and we could pick that up and do something with it. What people need is action. And I think that each and every one of us who've been on this panel, we don't want to be the last ones. Even if you want the first at something, don't want to be the last one or the only one. So I think that, we've each got responsibilities too.
Thank you all to participants, people who've been putting questions and chat and suggestions in the chat and the Q&A. Fantastic panelists. I feel really inspired. I was going to ask you a last question, but we ran out of time, which is about what joy you felt in the last few months. I have felt great joy from being inspired and reinvigorated. It's sometimes felt in the last couple of months like we're going over old ground, but with colleagues like all of you, I really do feel quite optimistic, even though we're in a really tough time. So Wanda, Patrick, Shivana, Roger and Marvin, somewhere out in the park somewhere, thank you all so much. Thank you to Innes and the TUC Southwest for organising Tolpuddle as always, and hope to see us all next year, like actually in Tolpuddle. Take care and stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Hello, 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 and the sun's just come out. Time to grab yourselves a beautiful cocktail, because we're about to go to the Caribbean and have a fantastic dance along with the wonderful, the one, the legend that is Antigua Joe.
Good evening, Tolpuddle music. My name is Antigua Joe. I'm here to sing you loads of reggae and calypso. I don't sing soul and I don't sing pop and I don't sing songs that are gonna be a flop. My name is Antigua Joe. But I'm here today with my good friend, San Gennaro.
Hello, Tolpuddle.
Yeah. We're gonna play you 3 songs. The first one is called Dragonfly. Yeah, man. Hey! Here we go. Everybody's worried about time, but I can't keep that shit off my mind. People are living on 24-hour clocks, but we're on a ride that never stops. Hey, Mr. Tree, the world changed, but you remain the same. And I wonder how you survive with the environment going down the drain. Hey, Miss Dragonfly, look at you with your beautiful eyes. You must be wondering what kind of creature is man. A dog looked at me and said, Joe, why can't we trust man? You know, Pussy and me got together and say, why can't we just understand? An old tree stood there silently, listening to every word we said. What kind of creature, what kind of creature is man? He said, hey, Mr. Tree, the world changed, but you remain the same. And I wonder how you'll survive with the environment going down the drain. Hey, Miss Dragonfly, look at you with your beautiful eyes. You must be wondering what kind of creature is man. Solo time. You must be wondering what kind of creature is man. Guitar time. Here we go. Hey! Everybody's worried about time, but I can't keep that shit off my mind. People living on 24-hour clocks, away on a ride, away on a ride, away on a ride that never stops. I said, hey, Mr. B, the world changed, but you remain the same. And I wonder how you'll survive with the environment going down the drain. Hey, Miss Dragonfly, I look at you with your beautiful eyes. You must be wondering what kind of creature am I? You must be wondering what kind of creature am I? Percussion time. the wonderful Robert Nesta Marley, written way back in the 70s, and it's a great theme for the Tolpuddle Martyrs and for the rest of the country and the rest of the world, because this is exactly what we have to do right now. It's called Get Up, Stand Up. Get up, stand up for your rights. I said to get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. I said to get up, stand up for your rights. I said to get up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Preacher man, don't tell me heaven is on the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. All that glitters is not gold, and the story has never been told. And now we see the light, we're gonna stand up for our rights. Hey, get up, stand up, stand up, stand up for your rights. Stand up, get up, stand up, get up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up, get up, stand up for your rights. Stand up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Most people think great shower will come from the sky, take away everything and make everybody feel high. But if you know what life is worth, then you look for yours on earth. And now we see the light, we're gonna stand up for our rights. Hey, get up, stand up, stand up, stand up for your rights. Get up, stand up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Stand up, get up, stand up, stand up, stand up for your rights. Stand up, get up, stand up, stand up, don't give up the fight. Sick and tired of the isn't schisms game, go to heaven in a Jesus' name. We know what we understand. Almighty Jah is a living man. You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Now you see the light, we're gonna stand up for our rights. Hey, get up, stand up, stand up, stand up for your rights. Stand up, get up, stand up, get up, don't give up the fight. Get up, stand up, stand up, stand up for your rights. Stand up, get up, stand up, get up, don't give up the fight. I said that. No, 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 don't give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Never give up the fight. I said to never give up the fight. He said never give up the fight. I said to never give up the fight. I said to never give up the fight. I said to never give up the fight. Oh yeah. Why yo yo yo, why yo yo yo, why yo, why yo, why yo yo yo, why yo yo yo. Never give up the fight. I said we never give up the fight. I said we never give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Never give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. I said never give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Never give up the fight. Don't give up the fight. Hey 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 hey. Get up, stand up. Okay, folks, this is my last song. I hope you've enjoyed my 3 numbers that I put together for this virtual festival. And hopefully sometime in the near future, when all this pandemic is done, we'll get to see each other in the flesh. Until then, take care, stay safe, and enjoy life. Take care of each other and yourselves. This song is called Wish You Were Here from my album called Love for Life. Thank you very much. So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from gray? Can you tell the green field from a cold steel rail, a smile from a face? And do you think you can tell? And did they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, hot air for breeze, golden comfort for change? And did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage? Hey! So you think you can tell? We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year, running around the same old round. What we found, the same old fears. Oh, I wish you were here. Hey! So you think you can tell? Oh, heaven from hell, blue skies from gray. Can you tell the green field from a cold steel rail, a smile from a veil? And do you think you can tell? We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl, year after year, running around the same old ground. What we found, the same old fears. Oh, I wish you were here. To my mama, how I wish you were here. To my papa, I said, how I wish you were here. To my sister, I said, how I wish you were here. To the Manchester 22, how I wish you were here. To the London Bridge H, how I wish you were here. To the Grenfell Tower victims, how I wish you were here. To anyone who's lost somebody dear, how I wish you were here. To all the victims of the pandemic, how I wish wish you were here. Break it down. How I wish you were here. I'd like to dedicate this song to anyone over the last 49 years that has lost somebody dear to them. And I say, how I wish you were here. 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 Thank you very much. Good night, Jah Rastafari. Nam Myoho Cow.
Statues don't teach history. They'll tell you more about the folk that erected them. A twisted sense of victory, limited love for those that elected them. When Edward Colston got ordered to the Oggy by a Black Lives Matter demo, to be fair, that's history in the making. That's history being made right then. And when all this is over and we're mourning our family and friends, we're gonna build a statue of Boris Johnson and chuck it straight in the Thames. Yes, he follows the science, but only when the science tells him what he wants to hear. Like someone took the Black Lives Report and made several sections disappear. But what would you expect from Piccadilly Johnson, elevated to the top job, then coming over all bewildered schoolboy, surprised by the virus and the praying mob. So when all this is over and we're mourning our family and friends, we're gonna build a statue of Boris Johnson and chuck it straight in the Thames. Not on his watch, but no justice for Grenfell. 3 years on, the cladding's not gone, and the number of deaths from COVID-19 should be an embarrassment to anyone. 22 days of dither and delay, he says he's proud. He's jaw-dropping, what's the strategy now, Mr. Johnson? He says you should all look forward to going shopping. And when all this is over and we're mourning our family and friends, we're gonna build a statue of Boris Johnson and chuck it straight in the Thames. Yeah, when all this is over and we're mourning our family and friends, we're gonna build a statue of Boris Johnson and chuck it straight in the Thames.
Football legend, second to none, Jack Leslie came to Devon, 1921. because he was black. Jack Leslie never got his due.
Una mattina mi sto svegliato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sto svegliato e ho trovato l'invasore. Oh partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, perché mi sento di morire. E se io muoio da partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Se io muoio da partigiano e tu mi devi seppellire lassù in montagna, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Seppellire lassù in montagna e sotto l'ombra di un bel fiore. Passeranno, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E le genti che passeranno e mi diranno che bel fiore. E questo è il fiore del partigiano, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E questo è il fiore del partigiano, è morto per la libertà.
Jack Jones was an irrepressible force of nature, a man whose heart was filled with compassion, who had a spirit made of steel and a brain as sharp as a razor, a man who exercised more power over government economic policy than any other trade union leader in this country's history.
Many ordinary people did genuinely believe he was the best Prime Minister we never had.
At any time when it was the state versus ordinary working people, he'd be in the middle of it.
Jack Jones was one of the biggest influences on me as a trade unionist and as a socialist.
He was a giant of our movement, and many of us have got huge, huge boots to fill.
He's someone who fought for workers' rights, for democracy, not just in politics, but in the workplace as well. And the world would be a better place if we had more Jack Joneses.
Anybody who looks at Jack's life and says, well, it was then, nothing to do with now, absolutely wrong. Know about him and his times, and you'll be able to fight the fight again.
Welcome to Tolpuddle 2020. This festival is brought to you thanks to the generosity of trades unions, the TUC and the help of many volunteers, but we don't ask or expect professional performers to work for nothing. We support the entertainment unions in their campaign to get fair pay for the work they do. So if you can, please support the festival by giving a donation, however small, through the Tolpuddle online shop.
Once described as a feral folk musician of enormous talent and a one-time winner of the Live Act of the Year at the BBC Two Folk Awards, please welcome...
Hello everyone at Tolpuddle. I've got some good memories of Tolpuddle, also joining in, singing, teaching one of my songs with a trade union choir in those lovely harmonies. just informally, wasn't on stage, and jamming in with people, playing trombone in a session. I think it was old-timey music. I'm sure there's a Woody Guthrie song in there. And I was also proud to find an old mate of mine at Tolpuddle from school who'd become a shop steward in his workplace, Pete. And Tolpuddle's a place where trade unionists, activists, working people become nourished, and strengthened by the sharing of ideas and the sharing of a vision of a world without racism and hunger, poverty, pollution, violence and war. I feel personally that being at Tolpuddle strengthens our hope, gives a feeling of solidarity with sharing a vision of the world that we have in common with everyone else, and celebrating our internationalism, reaching out to others around the world. I make up all kinds of songs. Got songs for my family, got one for my mum, my grandma, my dad, got work songs, travelling songs, kissing songs, divorce, migration songs, circus clowns, songs about circus clowns and drink, and basically I sing to keep memory alive. And all of my songs are love songs, they're all love songs. Some are angrier than others. And I've got 4 songs for you today to sing you, using harmonica and spoons and whatever else. So of course, it's called When Children Starve in Peacetime. It should be called War. Like the Third World War, really, the war of economics going on. They know how we feel, but they're not close enough to know, or never have been. How many homeless could live in your block of empty offices? How many could keep warm and dry in your Buckingham palaces? A tube train isn't like a Rolls Royce, it won't see you home to your front door. A power corrupts, and the fares are going up. The rich can travel without the poor. The corporations must sell to their prices right. They've got to throw away food and give it to the poor. We can't eat until they've made their profits, and that's what business is for, to create a hunger. That's the game, to create the demand is a commercial law to make things scarce. That's the game, to create the demand is a commercial law. So when children starve in peacetime, it should be called war. When children starve in peacetime, it should be called war. We were born in a graveyard. We were born in a graveyard. We were born in a graveyard. We never died in defeat. They tried to define us by fighting. We see that the weapons are chosen by our enemies, and the money paid to us was never enough. No, and we couldn't afford to work for love one day. We'll only want money to give us all the time to get all those things that money can't buy. What money can't buy, things that money can't buy. What money can't buy. Time to change and time to rechange. Time for changing, time to rechange in us. And oh, when our love has a tank, a plastic bullet, or a truncheon, and all it is the only place your bankers feel some emotion. They'll need money for war, to feed the hungry with bombs. They are training their police to be as clever as guns, clever as guns, clever as guns, clever as guns, 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 clever as guns, as clever as guns, clever as guns, guns, guns. When children starve in peacetime, it should be called war. When children starve in peacetime, it should be called war. This song is about a fruit market. Spitalfields Fruit Market moved after 400 years. It moved out to Hackney Marshes, and a lot of the old fellas are still around, and they used to have to do the work of cart horses, pulling underweight parsnips through sleet and snow, and they've got rheumatoid arthritis in their fingers, and some are in wheelchairs now, but they feel privileged to have their old age, and look back and think things are now better because the new places, they've got forklift trucks, and there's no rats, and there's banana ripening depot places, and all kinds of folks selling food now. There's all Asian folks selling coriander and bindi, and there's African folks selling coconut and cola, nuts, and all kinds of well, food is medicine, basically. Food is medicine, so, as we know. And it used to be free. It seasons all the year round now, because refrigeration, you know. But during the war, oh, you were lucky to get a crispy Kent apple when all the banana boats from the ships, container loads from Costa Rica or Jamaica, well, you couldn't get them. A lot of camaraderie in the market. There's a lot of camaraderie, and well, you know, they used to play tricks on each other. You know, they never let the sun go down on an argument either. They'd have a fight then and there. They'd have a fight. And the crowd would gather round, and one fella, after the fight, he wiped the blood off the other bloke's face, put his arm round, say, come on, I'll buy you a cup of tea now, and it was all forgotten. Didn't keep resentment for years, and I just had it out in the open. And there were a lot of famous boxers that came out in the market, lightweight champions like Turpin and these fellas. Anyway, oh, they carried loads of stuff. They weren't always big and strong, some were wiry and strong fellas, you know, with muscles and wiry muscles, and you might get a bloke carrying for years and years, carrying on his shoulder after doing that for years, one shoulder was lower than the other, you know. And so, to straighten himself up a bit, he'd have to walk down the road with one foot on the pavement and one in the gutter just to straighten himself up, you know. And they you know, there was this straw that you pack fruit with so they wouldn't bruise, and set light to that foolish stuff, you know, while they're carrying it. And yeah, there was tarantella spiders, maybe tarantulas. Maybe that's where the dance came from, I don't know. This tune is a kind of country tune, only because it's dedicated to Charlie Bogard, who loved yodeling, and Charlie loved yodeling, so I made this kind of country and eastern tune for him. Yeah, it's country and eastern music, East End music, and yeah, it was shift work. This, you know, so they'd have to get work all night, and then they might get home in the mornings, take the kids to school, and flop into bed. But that meant there were bars open all night and cafes. You could, in the middle of the night, you could go and have liver and onions, bacon and eggs, scrambled eggs, bubble and sweet baked beans, cup of tea, or a pint of stout. And that, of course, attracted all kinds of other people there. They were, apart from insomniacs, there were men and women there playing melodeons, banjos. There were prostitutes working there with the businessmen doing deals. All kind of folk just come down for a late night drink. Anyway, they used to have to stand underneath this clock, big old clock with a tick in their hand, ticking it in their hand, hoping to be picked for work. There wasn't much work back then, and they might have been queuing there with this ticket with their brothers, dads, uncles, grandpas, cousins, and with a ticket in hand, hoping to be picked for work. Ticket women, number waiting under the clock. We used to gather underneath it to report for work. The governors would just choose the men who work hard, carrying sacks of spud to hundredweight and a half, carrying sacks of spud to hundredweight and a half. With their arms and their backs, we'd have to pick them up. Nowadays they lift them with a forklift truck. I used to wear rope around my hips to give me more pull. There's more skill than the strength of an oxen ball, and more knack than the strength of an oxen bone. I wear an apron and I've got a knife for cutting strings. There were hooks for hooking spuds, pulling up to the top of a ladder. I put them on the stacks. These underweight bags were breaking my back. These underweight bags were breaking my back. There was hiring a farm and there weren't no jobs back then. We used to wake up in the dark and rise at 3 a.m. After washing off the dust and the mud of my sweat, I take the kids to nursery and flop in the bed. I take the kids to school and I'm flopping the bed. I fought off all my colds, I'm a berry and a grinner, and I've seen more dinner times and dinners. But I'm lucky my age, yes, I'm a rich man, cause I can walk and I can breathe and do the things that I can. I got the market full of blows in my arms and in my knees and in my bones. I got the market full of blows in my arms and in my knees and in my bones. I couldn't feel my fingers banging them against the wall. I used to put them in my mouth to try to suck out the cold. I get aches in my fingers, I gripping on the barrel. I loaded cauliflower in the sleet and the snow. I loaded cauliflower in the sleet and the snow. Rheumatism in my shoulders and my legs are stiff from pulling lettuce in the ice on the graveyard shift. Freezing wet and drowning in the wind and the rains. I haven't got muscles, I've got aches and pains. I haven't got muscles, I've got aches and pains. We used to gather around a fire outside to keep warm, meds, drinkers, prostitutes, governors and all. The van girls are outside the garden alone. There are women chilling peas in the cellar down below. Yes, there are women chilling peas in the cellar down below. I fought off all my colds and my berry and a grinner, and I've seen more dinner times and dinners. But I'm lucky my age, yes, I'm a rich man, cause I can walk and I can breathe, I do the things that I can. I got the market full of blows in my arms and in my knees and in my bones. I got the market full of blows in my arms and in my knees and in my bones. I miss the smells of old Spitalfields market, there's spirit in those bricks. How did I start? I started out pal for a couple of weeks. Now here I am, after 47 years. I must be a mug, but it's in my bones and it's in my blood. Now why do I do it? Why do I work? It puts clothes on my kids and it buys us food. I must be mad, but it pays the rent. I've been here too many years and it's in my blood. It was in my father's hot blood and it was in his dad's. They taught me to work on the fruit game. We, all of us, just be mad when my in-laws and my outlaws' uncles have all been handling the fruit. Black earth under my fingernails as I peel off my onion roots. Well, my grandpa's dad and his uncle's son have all been working it since we were young and were rosy cheeked like cock's apples, as fresh as the berries we carried in barrels up earlier than the birds at dawn. We yodel and we whistle and sing, pulling the barrow from Essex through Whitechapel and Bethnal Green. Like the ruby juices in this pomegranate, the dark black earth is on this spud. Somebody's tears are in this onion, then the market's in our blood. Yes, like wine is blood and grapes make wine. I can't retire and I won't resign. I'd fry it all away if I could stop, I would, but I can't chuck it in because it's in my blood. I love to feel peaches and kiwis, shiny pink peppers and mandarins, touch bunches of grapes, tomatoes and plums, and polish the skins. I like people, I'm addicted, it's the personal touch. I can't tell myself away from this work, it must be in my blood. Yes, like the apple clings to the tree till it's picked or till it falls. I can't tear myself away from this work, it's got me by the... Hey, Paul! Bring that pallet of strawberries over here, yeah, put them on top of the peaches. Watch out, they're going to spill, watch out, they're going to bruise, watch out! Like the King Edward potato, pulled from the earth and the mud. We pull each other's legs about the job, but it's in our blood. Yes, my grandpa's dad and his uncle's son have all been working it since we were young and we're rosy cheeked like cock's apples, as fresh as the berries we carried in barrels up earlier than the birds at dawn. We yodel and we whistle and sing, pulling the barrow from Essex through Whitechapel and Bethnal Green. Like the ruby juices in this pomegranate, the dark black earth is on this spud. Somebody's tears are in this onion, and then the market's in our blood. Yeah, since I was just a sprout, I've been bruised like a Granny Smith, scraped like a spud, pulled like a carrot, plucked like a pear. It must be in my blood, yes, in my blood. A run of beans and cucumbers and running through my veins. Ah, melons from Africa, fresh figs and blood oranges from Spain, with the boxers, cauliflower ears and the sweetest green peas. If I'm mad, this madness is an inherited disease. Yes, tomatoes tomorrow and from our grandpa to me. It was in his blood, it's in our blood, so don't let our navel oranges bleed. Yes, my grandpa's dad and his uncle's son have all been working it since we were young and we're rosy cheeked like cock's apples, as fresh as the berries we carried in barrels up earlier than the birds at dawn. We yodel and we whistle and sing. Pulling the barrow from Essex through Whitechapel and Bethnal Green. Like the ruby juices in this pomegranate, the dark black earth is on this spud. Somebody's tears are in this onion, then the market's in our blood. I miss the smells of old Spitalfields Market, there's spirit in those bricks. How did I start? I started out pal for a couple of weeks. Now here I am after 48, 53 years. I must be a mug, but it's in my bones and it's in my blood.
Just 20 miles down the road from Tolpuddle lies the Isle of Portland, well known for its uniqueness, mystery and intrigue. Our next act up are beaming in from the rock, and unique, mysterious and intriguing they certainly are. They're called El Bores. Enjoy.
Just sort of, yeah, right. Okay, cool. 2, 3, 4.
Have you ever been involved with the British Secret Service to assist in their service, to manipulate the fear on a weekly basis? They don't fight for love, they don't fight for peace, they don't fight for love, they don't fight for peace, or equality, or recreation, or recreation. The blackmail and the gin, they set you up and then they take you in. The blackmail and the gin, they set you up and then they take you in. Tell him that you love him. 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 Tell him that you love him.
Just again, just a quick mention for Jest Fordham.
Jest Fordham may or may not exist.
J-E-S-T 234. Get rich, get rich, get rich. That's what you really want. I see you buying 3 scratch cards from Sharon. I saw you win £10 while you caressed your box of cider like an unfortunate baby. Have you ever been involved with the poor? I don't think so. We let ourselves down when we let each other down, and we let ourselves down when we let each other down. Have you ever been involved with the poor? I have on a daily basis. I am often touched by our generosity to each other. I am often touched by our generosity to each other. Get rich. after our thoughts have been left to decay in the ground. Our town bones are all that remain after our thoughts have been left to decay in the ground. I'm only slightly afraid of the end now.
Right, we're still waiting on Joe Grady from UCU, but I think I'll probably just go through how the tech bit will work from our side. So Hannah is going to be the chair, and she's got her own sort of running order, and hopefully you'll have sort of seen that. Otherwise, she will sort of call you in as and when. From my point of view, so I'm going to be in charge of broadcasting this onto Zoom. So you are going to be on a Zoom webinar. I will let you know when we're broadcast, and I'll do that on the dot at 4 o'clock. But we are also being live
Slightly afraid of the end
and that's probably going to come in about 3 minutes past 4. So in that 3-minute slot, Hannah, could you basically general health chat
It's all about life, it's all about cats, it's all about minds. I will leave nothing, just a peculiar stain, just a peculiar stain. It won't last that long, it will wash away, it will wash away, wash away, wash away. Our town bones are all that remain. Our town bones are all that remain. I'm only slightly afraid of the end now. Slightly afraid of the end now. It's difficult for you when you're left behind. It's all about colour, it's all about light, it's all about love, it's all about right.
Hi everybody, I hope you're enjoying that session with Elborez, really great one. I'm afraid we've had to cut it slightly. We're going to need you to do a refresh as well, because we're going to put an end to the stream, and then we're going to go to our next talk, which is the class of COVID-19, what next for education, with Hannah Packham from the NEU, and a brilliant lineup again. It's going to be a really good session, so please do join, refresh your Facebook, and join the Zoom if you can. Have a good evening.